One of the most popular and often used techniques in landscape photography today is focus stacking. And if you were to search for this term on YouTube, you would be presented with an absolute abundance of videos to watch from photographers all over the world sharing their specific focus stacking strategies. But one thing that is rarely mentioned has to do with the mistakes you want to avoid in order to create those perfectly sharp landscape photos. Now, focus stacking, it's not a highly complex procedure, but there are a few things you want to watch out for that could potentially ruin your results. And in this video, I want to share with you the focus stacking mistakes that I made when I first started experimenting with this, in hopes that this video will streamline or potentially speed up the learning curve, so to speak, for anyone who's not already familiar with this technique. And if you're not familiar with what focus stacking is, I'll be sure to put a link in the video description below to a video of mine from earlier this year that talks all about it if you want to check that out. Now, I was going to rate these mistakes in order of frequency. So mistake number 5 would be the least common, and mistake number 1 would be hands down the most common focus stacking mistake to avoid out of the bunch. But after careful consideration, I've come to the conclusion now that all 5 of these mistakes are extremely common. So the following are in no specific order whatsoever. And be sure to stick around to the end of the video as well, because I do have a bonus mistake that I'm hoping will clear up any type of potential post-processing issues you may encounter. Now, to jump right into it, the very first mistake is something that I simply call exposure shift. And this occurs when you're not using the correct camera mode to create a focus stack series. Ideally, you want to be shooting in manual mode, because if you're using, say, aperture priority mode or shutter priority mode, or frankly any other automatic mode on your camera could potentially be making subtle adjustments to the overall settings for each individual image in your focus stack series, especially when you're shooting a scene that has dynamic lighting conditions. And here's a good example right here, where there was the sunlight coming through the back canopy of the trees right through here, and the sun was kind of coming in and out. The trees were blowing, so it was creating a lot of lighting changes in the background. And if I was not using manual mode, and I was, say, using aperture priority mode, my camera could be subtly making changes to maybe my shutter speed. Or if I was using shutter priority mode, my camera could be making changes to the actual aperture. Whatever the case may be, you want to make sure that you're shooting in manual mode, and whatever settings you dial in, you keep those settings for every single image throughout your entire focus stack series. That way, when you go to stitch them together, they all have the exact same settings applied, and it just makes the blending experience much more seamless. Here's another example right here. This was in a video last week as well. But you had the sunlight coming through here, and the sunlight was just changing constantly as the wind was blowing these trees, and it created different lighting conditions, different shadows everywhere. And keeping everything in manual mode, or keeping my camera in manual mode, ensured that the settings were going to remain consistent throughout that entire series. So that's a very important tip, or something that you definitely want to avoid, is using any kind of automatic mode on your camera. Now, the second mistake is something that and this happens to me a lot as well, but something I call stack it all. And what it basically is once you get comfortable using focus stacking, you start focus stacking everything. And I can't really speak for anybody else, but I know it's something that I did. Once I got very comfortable with focus stacking, it was a huge confidence boost to my overall, I guess, photographic skill set. I felt better with just on-location techniques. It made me feel better about my post-processing. So once I got really comfortable understanding how to focus stack an image, I started focus stacking every scene. But understanding what scenes need to be focus stacked and what scenes don't need to be focus stacked is a real time saver, because a lot of times your camera can capture the scene perfectly sharp from front to back in a single exposure, so you don't need to focus stack everything. And what I struggled with was trying to determine, okay, how do you know what you should focus stack and what you shouldn't focus stack? And here's a good example right here where I did focus stack this originally. This is not a focus stacked image right here, but my first image was focused on this leaf. Then I took another image where I was focused on the middle portion of this, I guess, staircase or pathway. And then a final image was focus stack on this tree right here. So I had 3 images for this series. But I ended up using f11, and since this bottom portion right here was about, I think, maybe 10 feet away from my camera, I was able to capture this entire scene in just a single shot. So this image did not have to be focus stacked. And what I would recommend doing And once you practice this a little bit more, you'll get more comfortable with it. It won't take as long to determine. But if you focus on your foreground and you review the image and you zoom in on your background and the background is soft, maybe take another image and focus on the background and then zoom into that image and see if your foreground is soft. And if it's still soft, maybe you focus on the middle portion of your image. And ultimately just review your overall photographs as you're taking them to determine if there's areas of soft focus throughout. And if you determine that there's no way that you can capture that image in a single exposure, then that's how you know that you should go ahead and focus stack that photograph. But a lot of images you might think need to be focus stacked, but they really don't. And kind of a telltale sign is if you have something in your foreground that's extremely close to your lens, 9 times out of 10, you probably will have to focus stack that no matter what aperture you're using. Even if you're using f/22, you're probably gonna have to create a focus stack series. But if something is, I guess the nearest object is maybe, I would say 6 to 10 feet away from your lens, that's when you kind of get into that gray area, whether or not you could possibly get away with doing it in a single exposure or not. Now, the third mistake is something that I call focus gaps. And here is a good example right here. I know I shared this image quite a few times before. This is the infamous leaf image, and this is the final image right here. And here is the first image in this focus stack series. And I believe this is the one that I focused on the background. So you can tell that the background is perfectly sharp. And if we come down here to the foreground area, you'll notice that the foreground is very soft. Now this next image right here, I decided to focus on, of course, the foreground. The foreground is perfectly sharp now, and the background will be soft. And if I focus stacked only those 2 images together, if that was my entire focus stack series, I would be left with this right here. A perfectly sharp background, a perfectly sharp foreground, but this is where the focus gap would be. It would be right through here. In this area right here, it's not completely out of focus, but it is not as sharp as this area right here, or it's not as sharp as it could be as if I actually focused on this area right through here. So looking out for those focus gaps. And here is the final image right here after I went ahead and I focused on the actual midground area here. So the midground is completely sharp, the background is completely sharp, and the foreground is completely sharp. And that's something that's kind of difficult sometimes is determining exactly how many images you need for that focus stack series. I always think a minimum of 3. I've shot as many as 10 before. And the closer you have something to the, I guess, the front element of your lens, a lot of times that will determine how many images you need for that focus stack series. So if you have something in your foreground that's just a couple inches away, you might have to shoot maybe 5 or 7 or maybe 10 focus stacked images. But I would always recommend taking more images than you think, because once you come home, if you realize that you have a focus gap somewhere else, it's going to be pretty difficult. I mean, I guess you could go back to that location, but you're never going to get the exact same conditions again. So it's always better to capture more than you think you need. So if I think I can capture an entire scene in just 3 images, I usually will take 4 or 5 and just move that focus point in just a little bit slower fashion throughout my image. So always capture more than you need. If you end up not needing one, just kind of toss it away, but it's always better than having a focus gap in your actual series. Now, the fourth mistake is something that I call shaky alignment. And this occurs in multiple different, I guess there's multiple different ways that this occurs. And here's an example right here. This is the final image of this from Arizona. I should say final version. And here are some of the focus stacked images here. And as you move your focus point throughout your composition, it's going to create something that's called focus breathing. And every time you move your focus point to a certain area of your scene, you refocus your camera, or your lens is going to create something called that focus breathing. And it makes these just tiny variations of your overall composition. I'll show you what I mean right here. And you can really see this if you look at the edge over here, or maybe over here as I move through these images. See that subtle variation right there? And then here's another one. And as we move through it, you can start to see these. I'll go backwards again. You can see these subtle changes. And here's the final image again right here. So you want to make sure that you align the images in Photoshop. And it's real simple to do. Here's an example right here. All you have to do once you have all the images loaded as layers in Photoshop, you just hold down the Shift key, select all of your layers right here. We're going to come up here to File. And we're going to go to Edit. And then auto align, and then I always just leave this on auto, And then Photoshop will just automatically align all those images together for you. Now that's one reason that would cause the shaky alignment. The other reason is caused by if you bump your tripod, or if you aren't using a 2-second timer, or you're not using a remote shutter release and you're actually pressing the shutter button. When you press that shutter button, you're automatically introducing a little bit of camera shake, and that's going to slightly change your composition. And you have to, a lot of times you're going to have to either touch your touch screen to move your focus point, or maybe there's a dial pad on the back of your camera and you have to move your focus point around. So you have to have a lot of interaction with your camera, and you want to be very careful that you're not bumping it in any particular way that's going to change the overall composition, because you want everything to remain as perfectly still as possible, because that's ultimately going to make the actual blending and stitching process at the very end just that much more easy. Now, the final mistake that you want to avoid is something that is called slow-mo. This doesn't happen often, but it can really mess up your overall image. And I have an absolutely perfect example right here of this. This is from the same trip earlier I mentioned to Arizona. And this was captured, as you can see, there's no clouds in the sky. It was sunset. And anyone who has shot any outdoor images, it's sunset or sunrise. When there's no clouds in the sky, the light changes extremely quick. It moves fast. And what happens is, if you're not going through your focus stack series quick enough, you're going to get huge disparities in the way, the overall lighting of your landscape. So here's what I mean right here. So this is the very first image, and as you can see, this cactus right here in the foreground is perfectly sharp all through here. Here is the second image, the third image, the fourth image, and I'm sorry, that was the final image right there. And as you can see, if you look at the very first image right here, see how quickly the lighting has changed? And if I go back here, let me open up all these images. And I want you to see this image compared to this image. So this is the very first image, and here is the last image. So when I went to blend these together, the image that I focused on the mountains in the background, it did not have the good light. The best light was captured in the first two series. Now granted, the light was moving very quickly, as I just mentioned, but I also was kind of fussing around. I think I got a text message or something, and I stopped to do that for a minute, and I was taking a little bit too long to go through these. I think this was a 4 or 5 image focus stack series, and I could have gone through it much quicker, but when I went to stitch these images together, no matter how I did it, I just didn't have the good lighting conditions on the cactus and the rocks in the midground and the mountains in the background. I didn't have the good light on it throughout the entire photograph. So when the light's changing quickly, just try and get through your series as quick as you can without bumping your tripod or making any kind of unnecessary, composition changes to your overall image. So those are the 5 mistakes, and the bonus mistake is a real biggie, and it's basically to not always rely on Photoshop to accurately, auto blend the layers, or auto blend your focus stack series together properly. And I'll show you exactly what I mean right here. So this is the focus stack series right here, and as I just turn on these layers, you can see how the image slowly comes together all the way up until this point right here. And you can see the individual masks right here, but I would highly encourage you to kind of look around and make sure that Photoshop really did blend everything good. And what I like to do is just kind of turn the layers on individually like this and just see if Photoshop really is using the image that has the greatest area of focus for that specific region of your actual photograph. And a telltale sign or something to really look for is when you have an image that has a lot of moving water. That's kind of the area that Photoshop will really struggle with as far as determining what area is best to use for that specific region of your photograph. So I would highly encourage you to zoom into any kind of moving water or any areas where there may be moving trees or a lot of moving leaves, and just see if Photoshop is using the best possible areas of greatest focus to blend those images together. And if you're not comfortable with manual focus stacking or how to manually blend these images together, it's extremely simple to do. And I'll also put a link in the description to a manual focus stack video that I did a couple months as well. I'll also put a card on the screen that'll pop up somewhere here that you can take a look at that as well. But it's a super easy process to go through. It's almost just as easy as just letting Photoshop automatically do it. But I get great results by using the automatic approach in Photoshop. But sometimes when there's a lot of things moving throughout your scene, that's a good opportunity to manual focus stack those. But it's not difficult to do at all. So those are the mistakes that I encountered most often with focus stacking when I first started. And I hope that this video will help help you possibly feel more comfortable focus stacking your photographs if you're not already comfortable doing it, or possibly maybe you picked up something that, a mistake that you maybe were doing that you didn't even realize it. I know that happened to me for a while as well. And I hope you did enjoy this week's video. If you did, if you could give it that thumbs up, definitely helps the video perform better, helps the channel perform better, and is greatly appreciated by myself. And subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, and ring the bell notification as well, just so you're notified when I do upload. And if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. I guarantee I will get back in touch with you. And as always, I really do appreciate you watching this week's video, and I will see you all next week. Bye.